Welcome back to Bore Me to Bed, the channel where calm, quiet stories help you drift gently into sleep. Tonight, we'll be taking a slow, peaceful journey through the construction of the Panama Canal. From early dreams and distant plans to the patient, determined efforts that finally linked two great oceans. This is a story of quiet perseverance, told in soft detail to help you relax, unwind, and fall deeply asleep. In a quiet corner of the world, two great oceans stretch out their arms toward each other, separated only by a narrow ribbon of land. For centuries, people gazed at that slender isthmus and dreamed of a tranquil waterway that might let ships glide gently between the seas. The land in question was the Isthmus of Panama, a place of dense green jungles and humid air, where the gap between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans is the smallest on the entire map of the Americas. The idea of connecting these waters is not new. It first drifted into human imagination many hundreds of years ago. The Caribbean Sea laps quietly on one side, while, just 50 miles away, gentle waves of the Pacific touch the other. Between them lies a land of emerald forests and rolling hills, so narrow that it almost seems the two mighty oceans might whisper to each other across it. For ages, this narrow crossing beckoned dreamers and explorers with a tantalizing idea. What if ships could sail through here, instead of making the long, stormy journey around the bottom of South America? Early in the 16th century, European explorers realized how close the two great oceans lay in this region. In 1513, a Spanish explorer named Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama, becoming the first European to stand by the shores of the Pacific Ocean on the western side of the New World. He had hacked his way through jungle trails, crossing rivers and steep ridges. One day, guided by local inhabitants through the lush wilderness, Balboa climbed a hill and in the distance saw a vast expanse of blue, the Great Southern Sea, which we now call the Pacific. He descended to its shore, waded into the gentle surf and claimed those waters for his king. In his diary, Balboa noted that perhaps one day a canal might link that ocean back to the Atlantic. It was a bold idea at a time when such engineering seemed impossible. He took no further steps to make it real, but the seed of a canal was planted, a quiet thought that would rest in the world's imagination for years to come. A couple of decades later, in 1534, the King of Spain, Emperor Charles V, ordered a survey of the isthmus. He hoped there might be a river or valley that could be widened into a channel for ships, or perhaps a new canal cut through entirely. Spanish surveyors in armour and boots trekked through the thick jungle with compass and notebook in hand. They followed winding rivers, clambered up muddy slopes and endured biting insects and steamy afternoons. At night they camped under broadleaf trees and perhaps dreamed of finding a golden passage. But when their exploration was done, they reported that the obstacles were too great. The mountains were too high, the earth too solid, the task beyond the technology of their time. Disappointed, Charles V let the matter drop. The tools and knowledge needed to bridge two oceans through the earth simply didn't exist yet. And so the idea of a canal was set aside, a dream deferred to an unknown future, while ships continued their long voyages around Cape Horn at the tip of South America. Instead of a canal, the Spanish developed overland routes. Mule trains and later a rough wagon road carried the riches of Peru from Panama City on the Pacific to ports like Nombre de Dios on the Atlantic. For 300 years, this was the way between oceans, a slow, arduous trek through heat and mud under the canopy of the rainforest. Yet the notion never disappeared completely. In 1668, an English philosopher and physician named Sir Thomas Browne mused that the Isthmus of Panama would be an ideal place for a canal. His suggestion, like those before it, was just words on paper, but it showed that the dream persisted quietly through the ages. Through the 1700s, the idea would surface occasionally in learned societies and on explorers' maps. Some mapmakers even drew faint dotted lines across Panama, wishfully indicating a canal where none existed, as if willing the future into being. But those lines lay over untouched jungles and rivers that no shovel had yet disturbed. For the time being, they were dreams inked on paper, awaiting the era when engineering and resolve would finally converge to make them real. The first attempt actually to make the isthmus part of a new trade route came in the late 17th century, not through a canal but through colonisation. This was the ill-fated Darien scheme, launched by Scotland in 1698. Hundreds of Scottish settlers sailed to the humid shores of Panama's Darien region, with hopes of establishing a trading colony that could link the worlds of the Atlantic and Pacific. They cleared some land and built huts in the sweltering heat, dreaming that their settlement, New Caledonia, would prosper from the commerce passing overland. But the jungle was unkind. Food grew scarce, tropical diseases struck down the settlers, and their distant homeland could not send adequate support. Day by day, their numbers dwindled. After barely 2 years, the survivors abandoned the colony. They boarded their ships and left behind the timbers of their fort to rot. The dense rainforest soon swallowed all traces of their presence. The Darien venture ended in sorrow, a reminder that this land would not yield its secrets or its commerce easily. Once again, Panama's jungles and feverish climate had quietly guarded the path between the oceans from human ambition. Time marched on, and the idea of a canal occasionally resurfaced as empires grew and technology advanced. In 1811, a renowned German scientist and explorer, Alexander von Humboldt, published his studies of Central America. He carefully pondered 5 possible routes for a canal across the isthmus, and concluded that the most promising might lie in Nicaragua, where a large inland lake could form part of the waterway. His writings kept the dream alive among scholars and engineers. By the mid-19th century, world powers were openly interested. In 1846, the United States signed a treaty with New Granada, as Colombia was then known, securing transit rights across Panama, anticipating future projects. And in 1850, Great Britain and the US signed the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, agreeing that any canal built in Central America would be a neutral endeavour, jointly protected and open to all, rather than an opportunity for one nation to seize sole control. This diplomatic understanding showed how coveted a canal was becoming, even though its construction still lay in the future. A more immediate solution for crossing Panama came not with a canal, but with iron rails. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 sent waves of prospectors and travellers clamouring for faster routes to the Pacific. Many chose to brave the jungles of Panama rather than sail around Cape Horn. In response, a group of American businessmen undertook to build a railroad across the isthmus. Between 1850 and 1855, thousands of workers laboured to lay down tracks from the city of Colón on the Caribbean to Panama City on the Pacific. They faced steaming swamps, torrential rains, and lethal diseases much like those that would later challenge canal builders. Cholera, malaria, and yellow fever swept through the camps. By the time the railroad was completed, an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 workers had lost their lives to illness and accidents, a haunting foreshadowing of what canal workers would endure. Yet, the Panama Railroad was finished, and its first steam train chugged from ocean to ocean, pulling wooden cars filled with astonished passengers. The journey that once took days on foot now took only a few hours by rail. The locomotive's whistle echoed through the tropical air, and for the first time, there was a permanent, efficient link joining the 2 coasts of Panama. This achievement proved that mankind could indeed overcome the isthmus, and it brought newfound optimism. In the 1860s and 1870s, attention turned back to the possibility of a canal. The United States, emerging from its Civil War and expanding westward, saw the strategic and commercial benefits of a shortcut between the oceans. President Ulysses S. Grant established an Interoceanic Canal Commission to study potential routes. Surveyors fanned out in the jungle and mountains of Panama and Nicaragua once more, taking measurements and sketching maps in the quiet wilderness. In 1875, their report leaned towards the Nicaragua route as the most feasible. It had an existing lake and no towering mountains to cut through. For a time, Nicaragua was championed by many as the easier path for a canal, and American interest in Panama waned just slightly. But destiny would soon pivot back to Panama, spurred by the ambitions of a man from France who believed he could make the impossible come true. By the late 1870s, the dream of a canal was poised to be reborn. The spark came from France, led by a man who was celebrated for achieving the impossible once before. Ferdinand de Lesseps, a distinguished French diplomat and entrepreneur, had overseen the construction of the Suez Canal a decade earlier. That canal, cut through Egypt's desert between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, was hailed as an engineering triumph and had greatly boosted international trade. With that success etched in history, de Lesseps was widely admired and carried an aura of invincibility in matters of canal building. Now he turned his gaze westward toward Panama, convinced that he could replicate his Suez victory there. In May 1879, de Lesseps organised an international congress in Paris to discuss a canal in Central America. The gathering drew engineers, geographers, financiers, and politicians from many countries. In ornate halls far from any jungle, they debated routes and designs. Some voices quietly favoured the Nicaragua route for its easier terrain and large lake, while others warned that Panama's heavy rainfall and geology would make a sea-level canal difficult. But de Lesseps, full of confidence and charisma, pushed for Panama and for a sea-level design, meaning a canal without locks, cutting straight through at sea level like Suez. He believed wholeheartedly in this plan. By the end of the Congress, de Lesseps had swayed the majority to his vision. Amid applause and optimism, a new company was formed, the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interocéanique de Panama. Back in France, de Lesseps launched a public campaign to finance the project, appealing not only to wealthy investors, but to ordinary citizens. His passionate promise was that Panama's canal would secure wealth and glory similar to Suez. Thousands of everyday French people invested their savings, buying shares in the canal company. Money poured in, and enthusiasm was high. In their minds, the tropics of Panama perhaps even took on a romantic glow, the great civilizing mission of cutting a path for ships through wild lands. With funding in hand, work officially began in Panama in 1881. French engineers and skilled workers arrived by steamship to a land quite unlike home. They stepped onto shores where the air felt like a warm, wet blanket, and the jungle chorus, birds, frogs, insects, was loud and incessant. They established base camps and workshops. One can imagine the early mornings in those camps, the sun rising over misty rainforests, French surveyors sipping coffee and planning the day's digging, labourers sharpening their tools, and small locomotives firing up with a clatter. The initial aim was to dig a sea-level canal, approximately 75 kilometres long, about 47 miles, from ocean to ocean. The task, they knew, would be enormous, but perhaps they underestimated just how unforgiving the environment would be. Digging commenced at several points along the route. One focal point was the imposing Culebra Cut, also called Gaillard Cut, where the canal would have to slice through the central mountain ridge of Panama. Here, steam shovels and manual labour began biting into the earth, trying to lower the mountain ridge to sea level. At the same time, dredgers were deployed at the coast to start opening passages inland. Very quickly, the French encountered the stark realities of Panama's terrain. Unlike the sandy soils of Suez, Panama's earth was a mix of rock and clay that clung to equipment and turned to sticky muck under heavy rain. And rain was plentiful. During the wet season, torrents of water fell from the sky almost daily. The quiet Chagres River could transform overnight into a raging brown flood that swelled 10 meters or more, overflowing into excavation pits and washing out equipment. Workers would sometimes arrive in the morning to find that trenches laboriously dug days before had simply vanished, filled in by landslides or flood debris. Beyond the geological challenges lurked the more insidious threat of disease. Many French workers, engineers and labourers alike, began to fall ill shortly after arriving. At first, it was baffling. Someone healthy and strong would be struck by headaches, fever and chills. In many cases, within a few days they were gone. Yellow fever and malaria, diseases borne by the ubiquitous mosquitoes, became relentless foes. The concept of mosquitoes carrying disease was not yet widely known, so prevention was rudimentary at best. Doctors tried their best to comfort and treat patients in the makeshift hospitals that were set up. They prescribed quinine for malaria and attempted various tonics and remedies, but without understanding the cause, their efforts were limited. On muggy evenings, mosquitoes bred in the countless puddles and ponds around the work areas and in the jungle, continuing the deadly cycle. Entire families of French workers were devastated. Some who had come with bright hopes found themselves mourning a spouse or a child within months of arrival. The toll among the local Afro-Caribbean labourers was even higher, though their stories seldom made it back to Paris. By 1884, the death rate on the project had climbed to shocking levels. It's estimated that over 200 workers were dying each month at one point. In total, by the end of the French effort, more than 20,000 lives would be lost to accidents and disease. Each death was a quiet tragedy, marked by hurried burials in the thick red soil, often with simple wooden crosses if any marker at all. Work continued despite these hardships, but progress was painfully slow. The jungle seemed to resist every foot of advance. Steam shovels broke down in the humidity and had to be repaired constantly. Labourers swinging pickaxes were drenched in sweat from dawn till dusk. They cut through tangled roots and hauled away basket after basket of earth under the glaring sun and drenching rain. French engineers took measurements and realised they were falling far behind schedule. De Lesseps, who visited the site, insisted that more effort and more money would overcome the setbacks. He famously remained optimistic in public, downplaying the troubles when he reported back to France. Additional fundraising efforts were undertaken to keep the company afloat. The design itself also came under reconsideration. By 1887, it became apparent that a pure sea-level canal might not be achievable. There was talk of switching to a lock-based canal, which could reduce the amount of digging by using water elevators to lift ships part of the way. One French engineer, Adolphe Gaudin de l'Épinay, had suggested using a dam and locks as early as 1879, before the digging even began, but his idea was initially ignored. Now, years later, with time and money running out, the company belatedly considered such options. They even enlisted the famous engineer Gustave Eiffel, renowned for his tower in Paris, to help design giant lock structures. Plans were drawn up for a system of locks and a large dam on the Chagres River. However, these plans never fully materialized on the ground. The project was already spiraling into crisis. By 1888, the strain on the French Canal Company was becoming impossible to hide. Workers were still digging, machinery still clanking and groaning in the heat, but the funding was drying up and the goal seemed farther away than ever. In France, news of the troubles leaked out, shaking investor confidence. The once ebullient de Lesseps, now in his 70s, tried desperately to raise more funds and rally support, but to little avail. In early 1889, the Compagnie Universelle collapsed into bankruptcy. The great dream had reached a bitter end, at least for the French effort. Work stopped abruptly in May 1889. An unfinished canal scarred the landscape, a partly dug channel here, a rusting dredge there, and huge swathes of cleared jungle slowly being overtaken by green once again. In Paris, the failure set off a national scandal known as the Panama Affair. It came to light that there had been mismanagement and corruption. Bribes had been paid to journalists and politicians to keep the enterprise looking favourable while it floundered. The French public was shocked that an endeavour they had idealised had become a sinkhole for money and life. Ferdinand de Lesseps and his son Charles were charged with misusing funds. Gustave Eiffel was also implicated because of his association with the late-stage lock plan, though his role was minor. De Lesseps, old and broken-hearted, was convicted but never imprisoned due to his age and frail health. He would die a few years later, an old man whose legendary career ended on a note of failure. France as a whole mourned the loss, not just of money, but of pride and of so many countrymen who had perished under the tropical sun. After the bankruptcy, a period of uncertainty followed. The dream of a canal, however, did not die with the French company. In 1894, a new entity called the Compagnie Nouvelle du Canal de Panama, New Panama Canal Company, was established to take over the assets and maybe, somehow, continue the work. This new company had a more modest approach. They did not aim to complete the canal themselves, but rather to maintain the site, salvage what could be used, and keep the possibility alive for the future. A small workforce, only a few thousand, stayed on in Panama. Their job was mainly to preserve the existing excavations from completely deteriorating and to operate the Panama Railroad to generate some income. They cleared out brush, did basic maintenance on equipment, and kept the jungle from totally engulfing the work that had been done. It was a quiet, caretaker role, a far cry from the grand construction frenzy of just a few years before. During this time, key figures involved with the new company began to look for someone else to take up the challenge. One of them was Philippe Bonneau-Varilla, a French engineer who'd worked on the earlier project and believed passionately that the canal must be completed. He, along with American lawyer William Nelson Cromwell, started lobbying potential buyers, particularly the United States, presenting the value of the work already accomplished in Panama. They quietly argued that with the groundwork laid, and for the right price, a fresh effort under a powerful nation could succeed where the French had stumbled. And so, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the stage was being set for the torch of this colossal project to be passed from French hands to American, to finally see the canal through to completion. At the turn of the 20th century, the United States emerged as the likely inheritor of the Panama Canal project. There were strategic and economic reasons for this rising interest. The United States now spanned from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and its leaders understood that a canal would greatly benefit both its navy and its trade. President Theodore Roosevelt, in particular, was enthusiastic about the idea of an American-built canal. The events of 1898 during the Spanish-American War had highlighted the need. A US battleship stationed in California had been urgently ordered to the Caribbean, but without a canal it had to steam 13,000 miles around South America, arriving too late to be of use. Such experiences made the canal seem not just desirable, but essential. Roosevelt and the US Congress authorized a new Isthmian Canal Commission to evaluate potential routes once more. As the new century dawned, attention oscillated between Nicaragua and Panama. Initially, Nicaragua was favored by many American lawmakers because it appeared simpler, fewer challenges with terrain, and a large natural lake in the middle. However, behind the scenes, advocates of the Panama route were at work. In 1901, the United States and Great Britain signed the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty, effectively replacing the old Clayton-Buller Treaty and giving the US the freedom to build and run a canal on its own, with the condition that the canal remain open to ships of all nations on equal terms. This cleared any British objections out of the way. Now the focus turned to cost and feasibility. The US Commission studied volumes of data and even visited Panama to assess the remnants of the French effort. Initially, their calculations suggested that a Nicaragua canal might be cheaper. In early reports, they leaned toward Nicaragua. But then the unexpected happened. The French company, looking to sell its Panama assets, dramatically lowered its asking price from over $100 million to just $40 million. Suddenly, buying the partially dug Panama route became more attractive. Felipe Buno Varilla, the ever-persistent French advocate, lobbied fiercely in Washington. In a legendary touch, he mailed every US senator a Nicaraguan postage stamp that depicted the eruption of a volcano Nicaragua's Momotombo, gently underscoring the fact that Nicaragua had active volcanoes while Panama did not. Around the same time, a volcanic event actually did occur in the Caribbean region, which further reminded decision-makers of nature's unpredictability. Whether it was the stamp, the price drop, or the technical merits of Panama, opinion shifted. In June 1902, the US Senate passed the Spooner Act, which authorized purchasing the French rights and property in Panama for $40 million and building the canal in Panama, provided the necessary rights could be obtained from Colombia, with Nicaragua as a backup plan if things fell through in Panama. With this mandate, the US government negotiated with Colombia, and in January 1903 they reached the Hay-Heron Treaty. The terms seemed straightforward. The US would pay Colombia $10 million up front plus yearly payments to lease a strip of land across Panama, at that time a Colombian province, where it would build the canal. The treaty made it through the US Senate, but in Bogotá the Colombian Senate balked. Perhaps they felt the compensation was too low, or they feared losing sovereign control over a part of their territory. In any case, by mid-1903, Colombia had rejected the treaty, and negotiations stalled. Roosevelt was frustrated. The clock was ticking since the Spooner Act had that backup plan, and everyone knew Nicaragua wasn't as ideal if Panama's problems could be resolved. In Panama itself, frustration was also brewing. The Panamanians had long felt neglected by the central government in Bogotá, and many local elites were eager for the prosperity and attention a canal could bring. They saw the Colombian government's failure to reach a deal as a lost opportunity and a threat to their dreams. Behind closed doors, a plan took shape. Felipe Buno Varilla, still deeply involved, connected with Panamanian separatists and with US officials sympathetic to Panama's cause. The idea of an independent Panama that could make its own treaty was floated. President Roosevelt, while careful not to directly implicate the US in fomenting rebellion, made it clear that if Panama chose to break away and a new government amenable to the canal were established, the United States would support it. The stage was set for a new twist of fate on the isthmus. On November 3, 1903, a quiet revolution unfolded. In Panama City, local leaders proclaimed a new republic. The city's residents gathered in the main square as dusk fell, cheering and hoisting the new Panamanian flag, a banner of blue, red and white, into the tropical evening sky. Musicians played joyful tunes and families embraced, even as they kept a watchful eye on the horizon for any sign of Colombian reaction. Throughout the night, candles and lanterns glowed on porches and in windows, a quiet vigil of hope that the independence they had declared would endure. The event was relatively peaceful. On the day of the uprising, a Colombian garrison in Colón was persuaded, some say bribed, not to march on Panama City. Off the coast, a US Navy warship, the USS Nashville, stood by, ostensibly to protect American lives and property, but its very presence prevented Colombian troops from landing by sea or moving along the railroad to intervene. The message was clear without a word being spoken. The US would not allow Colombia to crush this movement. Within days, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama. It all happened swiftly. The Colombian forces, exhausted from their own civil conflicts and unable to send reinforcements quickly, were effectively kept at bay. The birth of Panama as an independent nation was thus closely linked to the Canal Plan. Scarcely 2 weeks later, in late November 1903, representatives of the United States and the new Panamanian government signed the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty. This agreement closely resembled the earlier deal that Colombia had rejected, with some differences. Panama granted the US rights in perpetuity over a canal zone roughly 10 miles wide across the isthmus. Within this zone, the US could act as though it were sovereign. The United States would build, administer, and defend the canal. In exchange, Panama received the $10 million payment, a massive sum for the small country's treasury, and the promise of yearly payments of $250,000 starting in 1913. Bunau-Varilla, who signed the treaty on Panama's behalf, though he was not Panamanian himself, did so in haste to ensure no opportunity was lost. Many Panamanians later felt some terms were too generous to the US, but at that moment the overarching goal was clear. The canal was finally going to be built. Early in 1904, the United States Senate ratified the treaty, and the US promptly paid the French company $40 million to purchase its excavations, equipment, and the Panama Railroad. American engineers, army officers, doctors, and an army of workers began to organize for the colossal task. They landed on Panamanian shores with a sense of mission. Unlike the French who preceded them, the Americans had the benefit of hindsight and the resources of an industrial giant. Even so, as they gazed upon the thickly wooded hills and swamps of the isthmus in 1904, they knew they were embarking on a journey that would test every ounce of their resolve. Yet there was a prevailing optimism, a quiet confidence that this time they would succeed in slicing a pathway between the seas. When the Americans took charge in 1904, they inherited the remains of the French effort, some 30 million cubic yards of earth already excavated, miles of partially dug canal, rusting machines, and the Panama Railroad. They also inherited the same formidable environment. The first year was a time of organization and learning. The US government had created the Isthmian Canal Commission, ICC, to oversee the project, a body of officials and engineers tasked with both managing construction and administering the canal zone. Initially, work proceeded slowly, almost hesitantly, as the new team assessed what the French had left behind and what needed to be done. One of the earliest challenges was leadership. The first chief engineer appointed was John Findlay Wallace, a respected railroad executive. He arrived to find quarters and facilities in disarray. The tropical climate had not been kind to the French buildings and tracks. Nearly everything needed repair or replacement. Workers were already falling sick in alarming numbers, and morale was shaky. Wallace focused on restarting the railroad and improving sanitation, but progress was frustratingly slow and bureaucratic obstacles from Washington added to his burdens. After about a year, overwhelmed by the conditions and the slow pace, Wallace resigned and left Panama in June 1905. His sudden departure could have been a severe blow, but the project was larger than any one man. President Roosevelt, not one to accept failure, quickly found a replacement in John Frank Stevens. Stevens was a self-taught engineer with a strong will and a practical mindset. He had successfully built parts of the Great Northern Railway across the Rockies in the United States. He arrived in Panama and immediately understood that before digging a canal, he had to build up a livable, workable infrastructure. Under Stevens's leadership, the project took on new life. He had barracks and mess halls cleaned up or rebuilt, ordered better housing to be constructed for workers, and improved the water supply and sewage systems in the canal zone towns. He prioritized the health and well-being of his workers as much as the digging itself, believing that a content workforce would be a productive one. He famously declared that the digging was the last thing to worry about. First, they must conquer the environment. A key ally in that environmental battle was Dr. William Crawford Gorgas, the chief sanitation officer. Gorgas had experience fighting yellow fever in Havana, Cuba, and he was armed with the relatively new knowledge that mosquitoes transmitted yellow fever and malaria. When Gorgas proposed extensive and expensive measures to eradicate mosquitoes, some members of the Canal Commission back in Washington were skeptical. One even labelled his ideas poppycock and scoffed at funding what he saw as needless luxuries. But Stevens, upon seeing the conditions in Panama and trusting Gorgas's expertise, gave him full support. Thus began an all-out war on mosquitoes and disease. Gorgas's sanitation department drained or filled in swamps and standing water where mosquitoes bred. They spread oil on ponds to smother mosquito larvae. Fumigation crews burned sulfur or released pyrethrum inside buildings to kill adult mosquitoes. Houses and hospitals were screened with fine mesh to keep insects out. They cleared brush around settlements, depriving mosquitoes of resting places near humans. Thousands of workers, the Mosquito Brigade, were employed in these efforts, and slowly but surely the incidence of disease plummeted. Yellow fever, the nightmare of the French period, was completely eliminated from the canal zone by late 1905. Not a single new case occurred after that. Malaria, harder to eradicate entirely, was nonetheless greatly reduced. Those who fell ill were promptly treated with quinine and had a far better chance of recovery. The hospitals, once overflowing with fever victims, grew calmer. One by one, beds emptied and stayed empty. The effect on morale was profound. A kind of collective sigh of relief swept through the workforce as people realized the isthmus was no longer a death trap. Men who might have quit and returned home in fear chose to stay, and others now felt more confident bringing their families to live in the canal zone. With health conditions improving and infrastructure being built up, Stevens turned to the core task: designing and digging the canal itself. By 1906, it was decided unequivocally that the canal would be a lock and lake system rather than a sea-level trench. This decision, strongly advocated by Stevens and endorsed by Roosevelt, meant constructing the largest dam and human-made lake yet seen, and sets of massive locks to raise and lower ships. The plan required a series of locks to lift ships up from the Atlantic to Gatun Lake, and then back down to the Pacific. Gatun Lake, to be created by damming the Chagres River, would sit about 85 feet above sea level, effectively carrying ships across the highest part of the route. Stevens threw himself into planning this scheme. The Panama Railroad was upgraded and double-tracked, so it could handle the unprecedented loads of dirt and rock that would be excavated. He brought in more heavy machinery, giant railroad-mounted steam shovels manufactured by Bucyrus and Marion, each capable of scooping several cubic yards of earth in one bite. He acquired steam-powered drills to bore into rock, vast floating dredges to deepen channels, and rock crushers to make gravel and aggregate for concrete. Supply chains were set up to bring lumber, cement, steel, dynamite, and fuel. Everything was being scaled up for an American tempo of work, which was to be much faster and larger in scope than the French had ever managed. By this time, labourers from many parts of the world were streaming into Panama to join the effort. The majority came from the Caribbean islands, particularly Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad, lured by the promise of relatively good wages by their standards. These West Indian workers were experienced in tropical outdoor work and became the backbone of the labour force. Spanish labourers from Europe, Italian immigrants, and some workers from as far as India and China also arrived in smaller numbers, African American workers from the southern United States and a number of local Panamanians joined as well, often in skilled trades or as foremen. At the peak of construction, over 40,000 people were on the canal's payroll, making the canal zone a buzzing international community. To manage this diverse workforce, the Americans put in place a system unfortunately segregated by race and skill. There were gold roll employees, mostly white Americans or Europeans in higher-paying skilled positions, who were paid in gold or US gold-backed dollars and given comfortable housing and amenities. And there were silver roll employees, mostly black Caribbean labourers and other unskilled workers, paid in local silver currency, who often did the heaviest manual work. They lived in more rudimentary barracks or tenements, and their social privileges were limited compared to the gold roll workers. This reflected the racial attitudes of the era and created a tiered society in the canal zone. Despite the segregation, there were simple pleasures that everyone could enjoy. On Saturday evenings after a long week, one might hear strains of music wafting from the workers' quarters, perhaps a group of Barbadian labourers softly singing a calypso tune, or a harmonica being played on the steps of a bunkhouse. Cricket matches and baseball games were organised on makeshift fields, giving men a chance to unwind and laugh in camaraderie. On Sundays, the one day of rest, churches filled with voices singing familiar hymns, and marketplaces came alive as workers traded stories and goods. Yet, shoulder to shoulder in the tropical heat, workers of all stripes developed a quiet mutual respect. A West Indian drill operator and an American engineer might share a brief smile of accomplishment after a successful blast. A Spanish carpenter might teach a Jamaican labourer a few words of his language while repairing the barracks, and in return learn a folk song from the islands. In these subtle ways, the canal was not only cutting through land, but also bridging cultures. Under the vast Panama sky, the workforce became a community, united by the common hope of seeing ships sail through the path they were carving. Under the ever-driving guidance of John Stevens, tangible progress finally began to show. By 1906, the Culebra Cut was humming with activity. Steam shovels perched on benches carved into the mountainside worked in staggered formation, some at the top, others midway, others at the bottom, each chewing away at the earth and loading it into rail cars. Watching from a distance, one could see puffs of steam and hear the faint chugging of the machines as they moved with methodical precision. Drill teams worked ahead of the shovels, boring holes deep into rock and soil to plant dynamite charges. At set times, a whistle would echo through the hills, warning of a blast. Then a powerful boom would shake the ground, followed by a rain of dust. After the dust settled, labourers moved in to clear the broken debris and the cycle would start again. Each blast loosened more material for the shovels to scoop. Train locomotives, small but mighty, waited with flat cars. As soon as a shovel's bucket was filled with broken rock, it swiveled and dropped the load onto a car with a satisfying crash. When a train was fully loaded with a dozen or more cars of spoil, the engineer gave a short whistle and slowly pulled away, hauling the dirt to one of several designated dump areas. Some spoil was used to reclaim swampy land. A lot of it went into constructing Gatun Dam, and some was simply piled into gigantic artificial hills. One dumping site on the Pacific became a long breakwater and causeway, extending into the ocean, using rock from the cut to create new land. Day after day, this dance of excavation continued. The men in the cut often worked stripped to the waist under the punishing sun, their skin gleaming with sweat and streaked with dirt, pausing occasionally to drink water and wipe their brows with whatever rag they had. Despite the noise and harshness, there was a steady rhythmic quality to the work. Many who witnessed it remarked on the almost hypnotic sight of so many machines and people, coordinated in purpose. Often by mid-afternoon, the clear skies would give way to sudden tropical showers. Men took shelter under improvised tin canopies, or nearby trees as sheets of the warm rain cascaded down, drumming on equipment and turning the ground into red, muddy streams. The thunderstorms passed as quickly as they came. Steam rose off the drenched earth in the renewed sunlight, and the crews, soaked but refreshed, quietly went back to their tasks as the jungle steamed and sighed around them. In November 1906, the canal project received a visit from its greatest champion. President Theodore Roosevelt made an unprecedented trip, becoming the first sitting US president to leave the country for an official visit. He wanted to see the canal works for himself and to rally the workers. Photographs from his visit show Roosevelt at Culebra Cut, clad in a white suit and a Panama hat, with one foot up on a steam shovel, grinning broadly as he poses with mud-splattered workers. He toured the excavation sites, rode in a train along the line, and even operated a steam shovel's controls for a few moments, much to the delight of the crew. He ate with the men in their mess hall and delivered words of encouragement. Roosevelt's presence electrified the atmosphere. He conveyed to everyone that they were doing something heroic, something the whole world was watching. In his vigorous way, he later bragged, "I took the isthmus," emphasizing how committed he was to the project. But on the ground, he also saw the enormity of what had been accomplished and what remained to do. His visit, though brief, affirmed to the workers that the highest levels of their government stood behind them. For many labourers and engineers, it was a boost of morale that lingered long after Roosevelt's ship had departed. By early 1907, the basic design of the canal was set, and construction was in full swing. John Stevens had accomplished a great deal in organising and planning, as well as breaking the back of the work, so it came as a surprise to almost everyone when he resigned in February 1907. Some say he was simply exhausted. Others suspect he felt he had done all he could and disliked the increasing bureaucracy. Roosevelt, who did not want any loss of momentum, quickly appointed a new chief engineer, this time turning to the US Army Corps of Engineers. He chose Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals, a West Point-trained engineer known for his efficiency and stern dedication. Goethals arrived in Panama and took charge with military crispness. He was different from Stevens in style, quieter, more formal, but absolutely committed to finishing the canal. Under Goethals, the project was essentially treated like a military operation. He divided the engineering and excavation work into 3 divisions: Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. The Atlantic Division, under Major William Sibert, was responsible for the construction of the massive Gatun Locks and Gatun Dam, as well as dredging the approach from the Caribbean Sea. The Central Division, under Major David Gaillard, was assigned the monumental task of excavating the Culebra Cut through the Continental Divide. The Pacific Division, led by civil engineer Sidney Williamson, handled the Pacific Entrance dredging and the construction of Pedro Miguel and Miraflores locks, along with a smaller dam at Pedro Miguel to create a regulating pond. Goethals coordinated these divisions like an orchestra conductor, ensuring that all moved in harmony toward the shared goal. Goethals instituted regular progress meetings and was known for his hands-on approach. Almost every day he would ride in an open rail car along the line of the works, inspecting progress and chatting with foremen and workers alike. Though a stern and disciplined figure, he had an open-door policy each Sunday morning where any worker, regardless of rank or role, could come to his house and speak to him about a concern. This practice earned him a reputation for fairness and approachability. Workers felt that they were being heard, and issues like pay problems or job disputes were often resolved quickly, without strikes or unrest. Under Goethals' steady leadership, the final phase of construction moved with relentless determination. Gaillard himself would not live to see the completion. He succumbed to illness in December 1913. In his honour, the Great Culebra Cut was later renamed Gaillard Cut, ensuring his name lives on in the very landscape he helped carve. Meanwhile, the Great Gatun Dam gradually rose across the Chagres River, month by month. Trains delivered load after load of rock and clay to the dam site. The dam itself, when completed, was an earthen embankment over 1.5 miles long and nearly half a mile thick at the base, holding back the waters of the Chagres to create Gatun Lake. As the dam neared completion, the lake began to form behind it, slowly flooding the river valley, ancient jungle and low-lying villages after residents had relocated. Watching the waters rise was like seeing a new geography being born, a broad blue lake where once there had been only a winding river and forest. Gatun Lake soon became the scenic centerpiece of the canal, its deep waters dotted with former hilltops now turned islands. It was serene to behold, belying the engineering feat that created it. At the same time, the lock construction was a marvel of concrete and steel. At Gatun, on the Atlantic side, 3 consecutive lock chambers were built to lift ships in steps from sea level up to the lake. Further south, at Pedro Miguel, a single lock would lower ships from the lake towards the Pacific, and then 2 locks at Miraflores would handle the final drop to the Pacific Ocean's tide level. Pouring the enormous volume of concrete needed for these structures was a colossal job in itself. Innovative methods were used. At Gatun, a system of overhead cableways carried large buckets of concrete to precise points along the forms, allowing continuous pouring that solidified into monolithic walls. The lock walls towered as much as 60 feet above the lock floors and were so thick at the base, up to 50 feet, that they could contain a network of tunnels for the lock's plumbing. Inside each wall ran a system of giant culverts and smaller feeder ducts for letting water in and out of the chambers. The steel lock gates were fabricated in sections in the US and shipped to Panama for assembly. Each gate was like a pair of enormous barn doors, 7 feet thick, 65 feet wide, and up to 82 feet tall, yet cleverly designed to be hollow, which made them buoyant enough to swing relatively easily on their hinges. Installation of these gates was a delicate operation, achieved using floating cranes and careful alignment. When a gate was secured and tested, observers were amazed at how quietly such a gigantic object could move. Electric motors and gears allowed a single operator to open or close the gate smoothly, with just the faint hum of machinery. By 1913, all the locks were essentially finished and stood like silent giants awaiting water and ships. Throughout this period, the dredging at both ocean entrances continued apace. The Pacific entrance, near Panama City, needed significant deepening and widening to accommodate large ocean-going ships, and the Atlantic entrance near Colon also required an extensive channel and breakwater to calm the Caribbean swells. Giant cutter dredges chugged along, their rotating heads chewing up mud and sand from the bottom and pumping it away through long floating pipelines. Each division's work fed into the others. The material from the cut helped build the dam. The dam created the lake, which in turn reduced the amount of digging needed in the cut. The dredges extended the lake's navigable water out toward the oceans. It was all coming together, piece by piece, like a massive puzzle. As construction drew to a close in late 1913, one of the last steps was to join the Atlantic and Pacific sections of the canal by breaking the dikes that separated them from Gatun Lake's waters. The honour for the final breach went symbolically to President Woodrow Wilson back in Washington, D.C. On October 10, 1913, Wilson pressed a telegraph key sending a signal down to Panama. In response, a charge of dynamite at the Gamboa Dike, the last barrier holding back Gatun Lake from the Culebra Cut, detonated. There was a muffled explosion, and then the water from the lake began to rush through the gap. The final dry section of the canal was flooded. For the first time, a continuous waterway now stretched from ocean to ocean. Workers and engineers stood on the banks and watched as the waters mingled. A quiet but momentous moment marked more by the sound of flowing water than by any fanfare. Some blew ship horns or clapped, but many simply observed in awe, perhaps reflecting on all the struggles that had led to this triumph. Even before the official opening, a few vessels made cautious trial passages. The first self-propelled vessel to transit the entire canal was a humble floating crane boat, the Alexandre La Vallée, which the French had left behind decades earlier. Fittingly, it was as if a piece of the French effort was given the privilege of quietly traversing the route, in stages, to test the locks and channels. Then, on August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal was formally opened with the passage of the SS Ancon, an American cargo and passenger ship. The Ancon entered the Gatun locks in the morning, adorned with flags, and over the course of that day she made the journey through the lake, the cut, and down to the Pacific. A small ceremony was held, but it was understated, partly due to the fact that World War I had erupted in Europe just weeks before, diverting global attention. Nevertheless, those present in Panama that day felt the significance deeply. As the Ancon gently descended the last lock into the Pacific, a few whistles blew and a small crowd of workers and officials cheered quietly. A group of employees posed proudly for a photograph, marking the completion of an endeavour that had spanned decades and cost so much toil. The canal was finished at last and the first ship had sailed through from ocean to ocean. The canal was completed at a total cost of about $375 million in US expenditures, on top of nearly $300 million spent by the French earlier. This was by far the largest engineering project the United States had undertaken to that date. It had taken 10 years of American effort and roughly 33 years since the first French dig to realise the centuries-old dream. It was not lost on some observers that more than 4 centuries had passed since the idea of a canal was first mooted. From Balboa's time in 1513 to this moment in 1914, generations had come and gone, yet the dream endured and was now quietly fulfilled. Great achievements, it seemed, sometimes required great patience. When the moment came, it was hailed as worth every penny and every drop of sweat. The human cost, while tragic, was much lower under the Americans thanks to improvements in health and safety. Approximately 5,600 workers died during the US construction phase, a number that, while sobering, was a fraction of the losses in the French era. Most of these were West Indian labourers. Each life lost was recorded and mourned. Small cemeteries in the canal zone and simple memorials would remind later generations of the sacrifices made. The surviving workers received their pay and, for many, a medal and certificate honouring their service. Thousands of them had laboured for years, and now they could look at the canal with quiet pride and say, "I helped build that." With the canal operational, ships from around the world soon began to use it as a shortcut. At first, traffic was modest, just a few vessels a day, as shipping routes adjusted to this new option. But it quickly grew. The Panama Canal instantly changed global trade patterns, allowing goods and people to move between the Atlantic and Pacific in record time. It decisively influenced commerce. Grain from California could reach Europe faster. A ship carrying automobiles from Detroit to San Francisco could save weeks of travel. Chilean copper and Peruvian wool found quicker paths to markets. The opening of the canal even caused shifts in the fortunes of ports far away. Some ports in South America saw less traffic as ships no longer needed to stop en route around Cape Horn. The canal also had strategic military value. It allowed the United States, and eventually other nations, to swiftly shift naval vessels between oceans, a factor that influenced both world wars. As the canal settled into its place in the world, it earned quiet admiration and even a touch of whimsy. Engineers around the globe ranked it among the great wonders of modern engineering, a title it carried not with ostentation, but with the humble reliability of its service. In 1928, an adventurous American named Richard Halliburton decided to swim the entire length of the canal. He spent 10 days doing so, paddling through the locks and lakes, proving that even a lone swimmer could traverse what once had been impassable jungle. For this unusual journey he paid a toll of just 36 cents, his body weight measured as cargo, the smallest toll ever collected. Such anecdotes became part of the canal's rich lore, illustrating how safe and well managed the passage had become. Meanwhile, the canal's creation also unintentionally fostered a haven for wildlife. Barrow, Colorado Island, formed in Gatun Lake when the valley was flooded, was set aside as a nature reserve. In the decades that followed, scientists journeyed there to quietly study howler monkeys, colourful tropical birds, frogs and orchids in the untouched jungle. The surrounding forests, protected to keep the watershed healthy, teemed with life. In this way, the Panama Canal not only linked oceans and nations, but also helped preserve a tiny paradise of biodiversity in the heart of Panama. Decades after its grand opening, the Panama Canal continued to be run by the United States, as agreed in the Treaty with Panama. The canal zone became a well-organised enclave, with the canal operating efficiently day in and day out. In those years, the canal zone's American towns like Balboa and Cristobal were tidy and tranquil. Children attended English-language schools and played in yards adorned with tropical hibiscus flowers. On weekends, families might have picnics by the lakes or visit the lock observation decks to marvel quietly as ships from far-off lands passed through. The zone had the feeling of a small Midwestern town transplanted to the equator, complete with baseball games, Sunday dinners and community dances. Except here the backdrop was a working canal, and the soundtrack was the distant echo of ship horns and the gentle rumble of lock machinery. It was a unique, peaceful way of life that endured for generations, largely untouched by the outside world. Over time, however, Panamanian sentiment grew that this vital waterway and the strip of land surrounding it should rightfully be under Panama's own flag. Tensions occasionally surfaced. In 1964, a dispute over flying the Panamanian flag in the canal zone led to protests and sorrowful clashes, underscoring the need for a change. The calls for Panamanian control kept growing louder, but they remained patient and persistent. Finally, diplomacy prevailed. In 1977, Panama's leader, General Omar Torrijos, and US President Jimmy Carter signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaties, which laid out a peaceful path for the transfer of the canal to Panama by the end of the 20th century. Over the next 2 decades, Panama gradually assumed more responsibility for canal operations, training its own pilots and engineers and demonstrating its commitment to running the canal safely and efficiently. On December 31st, 1999, as the world prepared to welcome a new millennium, a modest ceremony took place at the administration building overlooking the canal. The American flag was lowered and the Panamanian flag raised, marking the official handover of the canal to Panama. This event was calm and dignified. Those present felt a deep sense of history. The canal, built with international effort and long administered by the US, was now fully in the hands of the nation through which it ran. For Panama's people, the canal is more than an economic lifeline. It is a beloved part of their national story. Children in school learn about the canal's construction and the sacrifices made, and they take field trips to watch ships gliding silently through the locks. The canal is featured in songs and local legends. Many Panamanians refer to it fondly as their country's lengthwise province, a ribbon of water woven into the fabric of the nation. Now that it is under Panamanian care, it symbolizes how patience and peaceful determination can yield justice and pride. The canal that once caused so much struggle has become a point of unity and identity, quietly enriching the soul of the country as well as its economy. In the years since the handover, the Panama Canal has continued to thrive under Panamanian management. The transition was smooth and almost seamless, a testament to careful planning and the shared interest in keeping this global passage running efficiently. Panamanian technicians, pilots and maintenance crews now watch over the canal's every function, from the massive lock gates to the tiniest tugboat, carrying on the legacy of all who laboured here before. The canal has been upgraded over time with new technologies and improvements. In 1935, an additional dam, Madden Dam, creating Lake Alajuela, was built upriver to provide more water storage and hydroelectric power, ensuring the canal could meet growing demand. The very rains and rivers that once hindered construction are now the canal's sustainers. Every transit relies on gravity and abundant water flowing down from Panama's green hills. In unusually dry years, the Canal Authority must gently adjust operations to conserve water, perhaps by scheduling ships closer together in each lock, or temporarily reducing the draft allowed for vessels. Nature and the canal exist in a careful harmony. The reservoirs and forests of the watershed are protected like a green crown around the canal, ensuring that each new day brings enough fresh water to lift and lower the ships that come seeking passage. In 2016, over a century after the canal's inauguration, Panama completed an ambitious expansion project. A third set of wider locks was opened alongside the original ones. These new locks allow much larger Neo-Panamax ships to transit, reflecting the evolving nature of global shipping. The expanded locks use water-saving basins and rolling gates with modern engineering, yet they operate with the same gentle principle as the old locks, gravity and water doing the work in quiet harmony. The canal remains not only a vital artery of commerce, but a source of national pride and an enduring example of international cooperation and human ingenuity. Now imagine yourself on a journey through this very canal. It's early morning on the Caribbean Sea, just off the coast of Colon. The air is soft and warm. You stand on the deck of a ship as it approaches the entrance of the Panama Canal from the Atlantic side. Ahead, a long breakwater shelters the calm waterway. Beyond it, you can see the first set of locks waiting, Gatun locks, like giant steps rising from the ocean into the green distance. The sea behind you is a broad expanse of gentle blue, but you are leaving it, entering a more intimate realm of water and land. The sun has just risen, gilding scattered clouds and lighting up the lush tropical shoreline. Low hills covered in jungle flank the canal approach. You notice the vivid green of the foliage, and maybe the silhouette of a heron standing in the shallows. Everything is calm. The only sounds are the ship's engines thrumming softly and the distant calls of birds from the trees. A Panama Canal pilot has boarded your ship to guide it through, an experienced, steady hand. With barely a jolt, tugboats nudge the ship into the approach channel. Your canal transit has begun. As the ship nears the Gatun locks, crew members toss heaving lines down to small workboats, and those lines are attached to stout cables leading to electric locomotives on the lock walls. These locomotives, often called mules, will help guide the ship through the locks, keeping it centred in the chamber. The ship glides into the first lock chamber, a massive concrete basin. From your vantage point on deck, the lock's walls rise around you clean and grey, still bearing faint marks from a century of use. The morning light casts soft shadows on the concrete. Behind the ship, the huge steel gates you passed slowly swing closed. They meet with a quiet seal, and for a moment, all is still. Then, without a sound, water begins to flow in from below, entering through unseen culverts. You don't hear rushing or gushing, you only notice that the ship is gently rising. The walls seem to sink as your vessel lifts higher and higher on the swelling waters. Within about 10 minutes, the first chamber has raised you roughly 28 feet. Now in front of you, the gates to the next chamber open, revealing another step upward. The ship moves forward, guided by the mules on either side, into the second chamber. The process repeats. Water wells up from Gatun Lake far beyond, gravity doing the quiet work that millions of labouring hands made possible long ago. By the time you have passed through the third lock chamber at Gatun, your ship has been lifted about 85 feet above sea level. You emerge from the last chamber and find yourself floating on a broad, placid expanse of water, Gatun Lake. The ship's engines hum as it gains forward momentum on the lake. Gatun Lake spreads out in all directions, glimmering under the mid-morning sun. It is hard to believe this lake is artificial. It looks as if it has always been part of the landscape, a vast mirror reflecting clouds and sky. Small forested islands dot the waters, once hilltops, now lonely islets peeking above the lake's surface. You might see a splash in the distance. Perhaps a fish has jumped, or maybe it's the ripple from a distant boat that isn't visible. Along the shoreline, dense rainforest still thrives, protected as part of the canal's watershed. Occasionally, a small canoe with a lone fisher might glide near the shore, barely disturbing the glassy water. If you listen carefully, you might even hear the distant call of a howler monkey or the flutter of a parrot's wings echoing from the trees, a reminder that this waterway runs through a living tropical forest. The air here feels different from the salty breeze of the open sea, softer, laden with the scent of fresh water and greenery. The ship follows a marked channel through the lake, passing the occasional buoy. Crew and passengers alike relax during this smooth portion of the transit. Some may even cast a fishing line over the side. Gatun Lake is known for its fish, like feisty peacock bass, while others simply lean on the rail, enjoying the gentle breeze and the lush scenery. Your ship shares the lake with perhaps one or two other vessels moving in the opposite direction. When you pass each other, you exchange friendly waves with the other ship's crew, both of you aware that you're part of a unique journey bridging two oceans. After several hours of serene cruising, the ship approaches the far side of the lake. The channel narrows and the hills draw closer. You're arriving at the famed Gaillard Cut, once known as Culebra Cut, the great trench through the continental divide. The entry to the cut is marked by Gamboa, a quiet town with canal authority workshops and dredging equipment. A lone dredge might be moored here, its presence a reminder that the canal is a living waterway that requires continuous care. As the ship enters the cut, the waterway narrows to a canyon, and steep golden brown and green hills flank you on both sides. These hills were once a single mountain ridge until human determination sliced through them. You look up at the layered rock and soil on the hillsides. Here and there, terraces and slopes show where landslides were carved back and stabilised. The scars of the past are mostly overgrown now with grass and shrubs, but they tell a quiet story of the challenges faced in carving this passage. Signs along the banks mark various points: Contractors Hill, Gold Hill, names from the construction era. The ship slows to a safe speed, sending only the gentlest wake to lap at the base of the cliffs. If you peer at the water's edge, you might spot a crocodile lounging like a log or turtles sunning on a rock, plopping into the water as the ship's ripple reaches them. Overhead, the sky's brilliant blue and a few white clouds drift lazily. There is a hush in the cut, broken only by the thrum of the ship's engines. This section is just wide enough for one large ship in each direction. so southbound and northbound vessels navigate Galliard Cut in planned convoys. The constrained space and high banks make it feel as if you are sailing through a great green corridor, a merging of human and natural grandeur. As the afternoon light softens toward golden, your ship comes to the end of Galliard Cut and enters Pedro Miguel Lock. This is the first step back down towards sea level on the Pacific side. Once again, you ease into a concrete chamber, now warmed by the late-day sun. The process is much like before, but now you will be lowered. The gates close behind, and quietly the water level begins to go down. You notice the green hills beyond appear to rise higher against the sky as the ship gently sinks with the receding water. In truth, you are descending, gradually stepping down from the height of the lake. The ship is lowered about 30 feet in this single lock, and then it sails out into a small artificial body of water called Miraflores Lake. This lake is a brief interlude, just a mile and a half long, connecting to the final locks. The ship glides across Miraflores Lake in minutes. You can already glimpse the skyline of Panama City far ahead, a cluster of tall buildings shimmering in the afternoon haze, reminding you that the Pacific Ocean is near. Finally, the Miraflores locks come into view, the last set of twin lock chambers that will bring you down to the Pacific. By now, the sun is low in the sky, casting a gentle bronze glow over the landscape. As you enter the first Miraflores lock, you might notice a viewing centre to one side where visitors often gather to watch ships like yours. A few onlookers in the distance wave to you, and you wave back, sharing a quiet moment of connection. The lock gates close behind for the final time. As the water drains from the chamber, you feel the ship slowly sinking, and the warm tropical breeze from the Pacific grows stronger, carrying with it a hint of salt and openness. Seabirds like pelicans and frigate birds glide above, occasionally diving to the water after fish stirred by the transit. When the first lock's gates open, the ship moves into the second, and before long the great gates of the very last lock swing wide. Ahead, the Pacific Ocean sparkles in the early evening light. The ship leaves the lock, now back at sea level, and enters the final stretch of the canal. A gentle sense of accomplishment falls over everyone on board as the ship makes its way under the Bridge of the Americas, a graceful arching bridge that spans the canal's Pacific entrance, connecting the land that had been divided. You look back one last time. Behind you, the Miraflores locks recede, their massive structures now small on the horizon, lit by the golden glow of dusk. Ahead, the Pacific Ocean opens wide and calm, extending to the horizon where the sun is just touching the water. The sky is painted with hues of orange, pink and lavender. The ship gives a soft blast of its horn in salute to the canal and continues out into the Gulf of Panama. In a few minutes you are in the open sea again, your passage across the isthmus complete. Now night has fallen over Panama. Lights begin to twinkle along the causeway and in Panama City beyond. But back in the canal's interior, all is quiet. The locks, illuminated by soft floodlights, stand ready for the next day's vessels. There is a profound stillness on Gatun Lake under the stars, and the canal's waters, having carried so much, rest calmly reflecting the sky. It's as if the spirit of the land and water remembers every effort, every life dedicated to forging this path, and now whispers a lullaby in the rustling of leaves and the gentle lapping of water on the banks. In the distance, a summer lightning flash silently illuminates a line of clouds, then fades. Fireflies blink near the lakeshore, tiny stars echoing the heavens above. The delicate fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and wild orchids mingles with the damp, earthy scent of the rainforest. The air is thick with the gentle chorus of crickets and tree frogs, nature's nocturne harmonizing with the canal's quiet presence. In the story of the Panama Canal, we find that patience and determination triumphed over obstacle after obstacle. What was once a mere idea, a faint line imagined on a map, became real through decades of steady, purposeful effort. Mountains were moved, rivers were tamed, countless challenges were met not in a burst of glory but through sustained, calm perseverance. It shows that even the grandest dreams can be achieved step by gentle step. The Panama Canal stands today as a peaceful waterway where once there was impassable land, a testament to human ingenuity and resolve, and also to nature's cooperation when treated with respect. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let your mind rest on the gentle image of the Panama Canal. Picture the calm water extending between starlit horizons, like a silver ribbon tying the world together. Imagine a ship gliding slowly through in darkness, guided by warm lights, everyone on board at ease. The world is calmer now, with distant shores quietly linked by this serene channel, and you too are connected to that sense of calm. As you close your eyes, feel the day's tension float away like a ship through an open gate. Your journey is complete, and you are safe and at ease, gently rocking on the currents of your own dreams. May your dreams carry you calmly onward, like a ship on a placid sea, and may you find a deep and restful sleep, as gentle and enduring as the Panama Canal's waters. Thank you for joining me on this slow and peaceful voyage through the story of the Panama Canal. I hope the gentle rhythm of the past has helped quiet your thoughts and bring you closer to rest. Wherever you are, may your dreams flow as smoothly as the canal's calm waters. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time on Bore Me to Bed.